All right, now focusing on some of the others, so besides meningitis or encephalitis, some of the other diseases that can impact or infect the brain or spinal cord. All right, one of the emerging infections that can infect the nervous system is the SARS-CoV-2. So as we're learning more, of course, the pandemic that occurred in 2020 with the coronavirus and COVID, there does seem to be a neurological or part of the nervous system that has been impacted. So the altered smell and taste, headache, confusion, some experience movement problem. Unfortunately, at this point, just not a lot else to say. Time will tell how that virus is able to trigger the symptoms, how it impacts the brain and the nervous system. All right, so looking at some that we know a bit more about. So the Zika virus is an RNA virus, so their genome is made up of RNA, not DNA. It is transmitted by mosquitoes, also during sexual intercourse, or disseminated from mom to infants. So when adults are infected, lots of range of symptoms from being asymptomatic to skin rash, some get an eye infection, muscle and joint pain, so that the symptoms can kind of vary. Also seems to trigger what's called the Guillain-Barré syndrome in some pregnant women are cautioned not to travel to areas where Zika is endemic and typically caused, because again, the fetus is more susceptible because it causes that congenital Zika virus. Some of the additional symptoms include just some vision problems, involuntary movements can lead to seizures and irritability. So looking at our summary table, again, vertical transmission from mom to infant, also vector-borne and sexually transmitted. So multiple ways of transmitting this, including blood transfusions. As far as virulence, again, of course, it's a virus, so it's hard to treat anyways. But there's a protein that actually reduces our innate immune responses to it. So preventing is by avoiding the vectors for the most part, and no actual treatment, just supportive care. Right, rabies is one we're much more familiar with. So it is a slow, progressive zoonotic disease. So it's transmitted through animals by fatal encephalitis, or characterized by that fatal encephalitis. So there are a couple different kind of types here. So there's furious rabies and dumb rabies. Odd terms, I know. But with a furious, we get agitation, disorientation, seizures, twitching, hydrophobia, kind of this fear of water. With the dumb rabies, we get paralyzed individuals, also disoriented, more stuporious, kind of in a stupor. But both forms can progress to a coma phase. So death does result from cardiac arrest and respiratory arrest if not treated properly. Just a little bit about the structure of the rabies virus. So it does have those spikes on the outside, the matrix inside, so kind of a unique little structure to it. Our little summary table here. So again, mainly passed on by those reservoirs, so many animals, so raccoons, kind of the most common ones that typically we would think about transmitting it, but many other could pass it on as well. So from a bite or scratches, also just from droplet contact that can be transmitted. It is enveloped, so it has the envelope around the virus with those glycoproteins attached to help it evade the immune system. There is an inactivated vaccine that's available, and treatment is after exposure to it. We do have immunizations that can be given, induced coma and ventilator support if not treated early enough and it's progressed to that point, can also be used. Polio is another one that we're pretty familiar with, thanks to a lot of vaccination, though, trying to eliminate this disease. Many efforts are in place to do so. But this has an acute enteroviral infection of the spinal cord, causes paralysis due to the neuromuscular unit or system. Some of the signs and symptoms, of course, we get a fever, headache, nausea, sore throats, migraine. Some of the neurotropic symptoms, again, infiltrates those motor neurons in the anterior horn. So it can also attack the spinal ganglia, some of the cranial nerves, and the motor nuclei. So that's why it impacts heavily that motor system. And a little bit more about it. Again, it can cause this paralytic disease. Again, various degrees here of paralysis of the muscles, bulbar poliomyelitis. This is whenever it's in the brain stem, the medulla, or the cranial nerves are infected, where we get loss of control of that cardiorespiratory centers that would then lead to that arrest. And there's also a post-polio for those who do survive, where we get kind of this progressive muscle deterioration in about a quarter to a half of the patients decades after they had the disease. Just a little picture here of what this looks like. So it's a Picornia virus structure here, where it does have a capsid. The protein coat is not enveloped like our rabies viruses. Again, our little summary table, so this is mainly fecal-oral contamination or by vehicle, so transmitted. Again, it does have an attachment mechanism. Those spikes that are on it help it attach to our cells and get in. Again, vaccination is really important. So there are two types, live attenuated and inactivated, but thanks to a lot of vaccination efforts, there is significant decline in polio throughout the world. All right, tetanus caused by Clostridium tetani. Clostridium is one of the endospore formers, so it can be resistant. It is also a common resident in the soil and GI tracts of animals, so something commonly out there. And again, because it's endospores, they can remain dormant and then become reactivated later. So in neonates, this kills approximately 35,000 newborns every year, so it's pretty common. The majority are from direct result of unhygienic practices during childbirth in developing countries. We get this tetanospasmin. This is a neurotoxin that's produced by the species. It binds to the target sites on the peripheral motor neurons, and it blocks inhibition of muscle contraction, so they stay contracted. So tetanus, just the term tetanus, is a continuous muscle contraction. So this is named because of that symptom, where it inhibits so it causes the muscles to stay contracted because there's nothing to inhibit them. So they contract uncontrollably, and it causes this spastic paralysis. And death is due to the paralysis of those respiratory muscles that leads to respiratory arrest. Our summary figure, again, Clostridium tetani. It is parental. So it's part of our GI system, so contamination that way or just direct contact. So again, especially this is why if you're having some type of surgery or you've had some type of wound, they'll always ask you if your tetanus shot is updated, because again, it's part of the soil. So if it gets infected and there are endospores in there, it's very commonly caused by that way. So keeping that immunization up to date is very important. Another Clostridium species here, so botulism. So botulism toxin here, this toxin can travel through the bloodstream to those neuromuscular junctions. This is going to prevent essentially the neurons from working. It prevents the release of acetylcholine in those synapses. That leads to paralysis. So unlike tetanus, where it stays contracted, this is preventing contraction. So Botox uses this organism to treat uncontrolled muscle spasms. Also has been shown to help with migraine headaches. Of course, it can be used cosmetically to help with wrinkles and other facial features. So with botulism, there's this intoxication state. So it is caused by an exotoxin produced by the organism. It's associated with eating poorly preserved food. So the three main forms, so foodborne botulism, infant, and wound, based on how it's transmitted. So especially children under the age of 2 should not consume honey, because the organism is commonly found there. Also, not food that's not processed properly to remove those endospores can also be a problem. All right, so again, this is caused by Clostridium botulinum. It is a spore former, as all the Clostridiums are, just like with tetanus. Again, it forms that exotoxin that prevents the release of acetylcholine, so it prevents muscle contraction. Again, transmitted food, air, or direct contact, also by injections. So again, prevention is by good hygiene, properly processing foods, especially preserving foods. There are some treatments available, so some different antibiotics as well as supportive care. Another one, less common to us in the United States, so African sleeping sickness. This is caused by a protist, so Trypanosoma brucei. This is a hemoflagellate that lives in the blood and tissues of human host. It affects many individuals in Africa, hence the name African sleeping sickness. There are 2 different flies. The tsetse fly, again, is a common fly in Africa, not something we typically have here in the United States. But again, it's transmitting it through that vector. Some of the signs and symptoms, some fever, enlarged spleen, frozen or swollen lymph nodes, and joint pain. Because it infects the brain, there can be some behavior and personality changes. Again, sleeping sickness, because it causes extreme fatigue and sleep disturbances, uncontrolled sleepiness. It can lead to muscle tremors, shuffling gait, slurred speech, and then death from a coma. Secondary infections and heart damage can occur. Summary table that we have here. So again, caused by the Trypanosoma brucei and gambes or rodences. Again, transmitted by vectors or vertical transmission. It can invade the immune system by causing antigenic shifts, so it makes it hard to keep up with it because it mutates so readily. Again, vector control to that tsetse fly, and there are some treatments that are available. The last few slides here are those summary tables of just looking at the different types of organisms and the diseases that they cause, so grouping them by the type of organism they are. So gram-positive spore formers, so again, our Clostridiums that cause tetanus and botulism, gram-positive bacteria, all that cause meningitis, or gram-negative, also cause meningitis. And then our viruses, so herpes 1 and 2, and the JC that we see with encephalitis. Our RNA viruses, quite a few of those that cause encephalitis. Again, our measles here, the Zika virus, rabies, polio, all caused by RNA viruses. And then a few fungi that cause meningitis or infectious proteins there. And then we also have some of the protists, so a couple amoebas that are involved here with that meningoencephalitis, and then the encephalitis caused by the Toxoplasma gondii, and then our African sleeping sickness that's also caused by a protist.